Welcome, everyone, and thanks for joining us today. I'm Bethany Schoen, the Marketing Coordinator here at Acadian Labs. Today's presenters are Andrew McElhone, our Sales Director, and Mike McGill, our Technical Product Manager. Take it away, Andrew.
Thank you, Bethany, and thanks everyone for joining us today. As a software provider focused on unified communications for over 10 years, we understand UC is not simple. Changes in technology are constant, and changes to work from home policy have had a huge impact on the industry over the last year or so. And we recognize that many of you are here today because you are either implementing Microsoft Teams or being asked to consider it for your business moving forward. So what is driving the interest in Microsoft Teams? Well, we are seeing common challenges from organizations as they consider Microsoft. First and foremost, many organizations have gone fully remote, and they're looking to improve collaboration. Total cost of ownership has also had a significant impact. In many cases, there is pressure at the executive level to drive down the cost of UC. And people are also exploring if Microsoft can be a complete solution, and in the case where it isn't, how do they effectively manage a hybrid environment? In trying to address these internal challenges, our customers have looked to us to help solve several key pain points. These include a lack of user interface with Teams, changes need to be made right now using PowerShell, the inability to implement role-based access or perform an audit trail, and some are looking for a solution to address complex provisioning workflows. And then finally, DM management. This has always been a struggle no matter what system organizations use, but in a hybrid environment, this becomes an even greater challenge. And this is where we can help. Quite simply, hybrid is our sweet spot. Acadian has long been deep in the Cisco UC stack, and this includes provisioning for WebEx and WebEx Cloud. But more recently, we've added Microsoft 365 and Teams. But we've actually been working with Microsoft for quite a long time, as Acadian Provisioning Manager offers native integration with AD out of the box. For those that wish to automate through an ITSM, native integration is available through ServiceNow. And then finally, we've introduced third-party triggers that allow UC admins to complete a provisioning action for other applications that might be in their tech stack. With that said, I'm going to now pass the ball over to Mike McGill, who will be walking everyone through the demonstration. Take it away, Mike.
Thank you, Andrew. So I'm going to be doing a demo, and here are the fine points of what we're going to be doing up ahead. I'm going to start with the Cisco user onboard, which is something many of you have already seen. And for those of you who have not seen it, this should be an interesting demonstration. From there, we're going to move on to our feature presentation, which was the Microsoft 365 portions. We're going to onboard a Microsoft 365 user with Teams Direct Routing. And then from there, we're going to look at our Microsoft 365 admin station and actually update a user that's currently in the list with the Teams Direct Routing. And then from there, we'll do an offboard of a Microsoft 365 user. Throughout this presentation, we're going to be making mention of the directory number management in Provisioning Manager. We've been using directory number management, DN management, as we call it, in the Cisco side for many years. And we've also implemented DN management in the Microsoft 365. So we're going to be talking about it throughout this presentation, and we're going to actually take a little deeper dive toward the end on the Microsoft 365 side. So without further ado, I'm going to share my desktop, and it should be coming up now. There we go. Sorry about that. And I'm going to begin with as I said, we're going to begin with a Cisco demonstration. Now, what I'm going to be doing with this is I'm going to be using a Cisco communication manager that has been Active Directory integrated, and it has, I guess, synchronization with Active Directory every 6 hours or so. The new user I'm going to be putting in, his name is Adam McGill, or his username is A McGill, and I'm going to search for him. And what it's going to do, I'm on Provisioning Manager right now, and it's searching Call Manager for this user. On Call Manager, at the same time, if I go to the end user database, as I said, my Call Manager is Active Directory integrated. It synchronizes every 6 hours. So A McGill is in there. However, I don't have any devices. So if I go to my phone listing, I do, let's say, a search for McGill on the description, which is normally what the templates would have. There's nothing there. So back to Provisioning Manager. Here is Adam McGill that they found in Communications Manager. They found that just an end user record. So it just has the first name, last name, et cetera, et cetera. Notice that there are no current services, no associations found down here on the bottom left. Now on the right, I have a couple of what they say add services, and these are the search services. These are suggestions based on the context. So in this case, they found no associations to this particular user, so there are a couple of suggestions. Both are onboards, onboard standard user, onboard mobile user, a mobility user. So when the current services changes, once I've onboarded him, you'll see that the services, the add services section on the right, that list will change to other more applicable suggestions. So we're going to onboard the standard user. In this case, we're going to put him in New York. And here we go. Here we start with the DN pools again. So the DN pool for New York, and within the New York DN pool, I have set up a contiguous block of extensions. And if you notice in this list here, I don't have a contiguous block. I only have, I'm missing a few. So 4001, 4002, and then it skips to 4005. 4003 and 4004 are actually already in use in Call Manager. So our DN management system is intelligent enough to know what extensions are in use and what are not in use and which ones to present for provisioning. There is going to be other factors in how this list is obtained. And we'll talk about that later when we talk about DN aging. So I'm going to choose 4005 for this particular user. And then here on the devices, I'm going to give him an 8865. Now notice here I have the ability to type in the MAC address of this new phone, which could be the actual MAC address, or I can use this button on the right where I can generate an auto-generated MAC address, which can be used with Cisco's activation codes or with Provisioning Manager's self-provisioning service. So that way you don't have to worry about managing MAC addresses when you're doing your onboarding of users. So I'm just going to perform. And now you're going to see the little spinning wheel here. So in the background, what's going on is Provisioning Manager is talking to Communications Manager, Cisco Call Manager, and it is telling Call Manager to create an extension, to create a Jabber phone, the Jabber CSF, the desktop type phone, to create that phone that I showed you with that generated MAC address, as well as a voice mailbox and Unity connection. So here it is all done. And I guess while this screen is updating, let's just go back to Call Manager, and I'll do that query once again on the phones with the user's last name in the description. And now you see he has two phones. Here's the 8865 that we put the generated MAC address, and here is the Jabber for desktop, the CSF device. So back on Provisioning Manager, now that single pane of glass screen is a bit more comprehensive today in this situation because we have onboarded him with a phone, with Jabber, with a line, with a voicemail. And then notice on the right side, services, where that add services list is different. Remember before it was showing a couple of onboarding choices. Now it's showing add Jabber, well, an offboard, of course, and then changing VM PIN. There are a bunch of different possibilities that you can actually configure, which we call search services, that basically tie into jobs that you've built in the background. So these are the ones I've configured, but there are at least a couple dozen more that you can choose. So this is our Cisco presentation. I'm going to move on to the feature presentation, which is Microsoft. Now, one thing actually before I move on to that job I just showed you in Cisco, and in fact, even the jobs I'll be showing you in the future in Microsoft, all those jobs I'm doing as a one-off, but they can be done in bulk. So you can do it in bulk. And also with those jobs, at least with the Cisco jobs, you can also automate. We can automate them with triggers as well. So let's say once the job is done, you can use a trigger to go to our native ServiceNow interface, or even to Active Directory to do updates. These are all part of this suite of products. Let's talk about Microsoft. Microsoft recently introduced Graph API, which was an API that was designed for configuring their users and teams. However, especially in the context that we're talking about, there's more to it. You're going to want to use the direct routing, that voice component. But that voice component, the direct routing, is only available for provisioning through PowerShell. So most of the users probably use PowerShell for pretty much everything because it doesn't make sense to sort of mix and match. What Acadian has done with Provisioning Manager is we have created a cloud platform that converts PowerShell to a REST API for Microsoft 365. So this allows Provisioning Manager to essentially talk to Microsoft through its own API through a middleware server, a pass-through as we call it. We call this the Acadian Cloud. So when you purchase licenses for our Microsoft product for APM, those licenses will include access to the Acadian Cloud application. So all this will be available to you. So what we're going to do in our demonstration is we're going to create a new cloud user. And the cloud user will also enable enterprise voice. Now, as we said, we can create the cloud user normally using Graph API, but to get voice, you have to use PowerShell. So we're going to do all this in one step. And notice that I'm using a slightly different provisioning method. The one I used for Cisco was a more simplified version for more common tasks. The interface we're using right now is the enhanced version of provisioning. It's actually also our legacy mode of provisioning, but it is really more for the advanced type of provisioning. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use the job onboard MS365 Teams user. And remember last time I used New York, this time I'm going to use Miami as my site template. And my user ID is Jack Casey, and his user ID is actually J Casey with an EY at the end, not a Y. Here he is. And also just another quick note. What I'm doing right now is I'm using an AD integrated system. And typically, you're probably not going to use an AD integrated system for an online user. You'll probably end up having an entry field in that user ID as opposed to that search that I was just doing, just to make things a little quicker. And here we go, the on-prem line URI down below. And this is interesting because, once again, here is our DN management. This is the DN management for Microsoft. But notice it's very similar. It's got a contiguous set of numbers, but it's not really contiguous in this list. We're missing a couple of numbers in the list, and that's because those extensions or those DIDs or DNs that you want to call it, they are already in use. So for this particular user, I'm going to give him 1005. Now, I'm also going to, let's go back to our, in this case, let's go to our Microsoft 365 Admin Center and take a look at this list I have here. These are the users I have currently configured in my Microsoft 365. It's not a big group, but what you'll notice is a lack of a name, and Jack Casey is not in there. So we're going to create a user for Jack Casey. So I'm going to go back to Provisioning Manager, and I'm going to perform. Now, what's going to happen now, just like on the Cisco side, the Microsoft side, we're going now to Microsoft Online, sorry, through our Acadian Online portal. And that job was done very quickly, and we'll take a look at the details. And notice the top row here where it says pending. So this is the interesting part of actually one of the really very important pieces of what we do in Acadian is now Acadian, a provisioning manager itself, is going to monitor the user status in Microsoft 365 Cloud because things don't happen instantaneously in Microsoft. So if we're creating a user in Graph, that's fine, but if you want to add the voice services, that doesn't necessarily happen right away. In fact, Microsoft needs time to replicate their system through their global network. This could take hours, minutes. I've heard of situations taking up to 24 hours. It usually takes probably more like an hour, but in this case, it is done not instantaneously. So pending. So what's going to happen is we're going to be monitoring Microsoft in the background while I move on to another example. And at some point in the next few minutes, that pending status will be actually changed to completed. But it actually says completed, but in the background, it's actually pending. So our next example, as I mentioned, we're going to be taking an actual user that's currently in the list. And actually, let's go back to our Microsoft. In fact, actually, let's refresh it. And you'll actually even see, here's Jack Casey. This is the guy we just inputted. But we're not going to work on Jack Casey this time. We're going to work on Ann Ford. And Ann Ford is just a Teams user. She doesn't have the voice access, doesn't have even an extension. And here it is. So what we're going to do is we're going to make an update to this particular user's record. So I'm going to do update MS Teams user. And I'm going to look through my list for Ann Ford. There she is. And notice that it takes a little bit of time for this information to come up. And that's because when I chose her name, now Acadian is going to Microsoft Online and querying Ann Ford and trying to get all the information about her. And you'll see that certain things already exist. Somehow, actually, there's an online prem URI, which I wasn't expecting to see, but that's okay. But she's got licenses. And oh, the voice is enabled. So let's deconfigure her. We'll take that away and do a perform. So really, what my example was supposed to show was actually to show the opposite. Apparently, Ann Ford had already been configured, and I'm getting a failed. So what I'm going to do, actually, I'm going to actually change this up a little bit. Instead of using Ann Ford, I have another user on here. For some reason, Ann Ford is not cooperating. Let's use Frank Coyle. Frank Coyle, I'm pretty sure, is not configured for anything. So here he is as well on the list. And let's go back to Provisioning Manager, and let's do Update Teams User. And we're going to look for Frank Coyle this time. And here he is. And once again, as I said, when we go to Microsoft, we're going to be querying what Frank Coyle has. This time, hopefully, it's going to come back with a blank and basically just his licenses. Ah, yes, perfect. So here he is. He's got no desk phone. Enterprise voice services are not enabled, nor does he have voicemail, no line URI, nothing with the routing policy or the dial plan, but notice he does have licenses. So he's licensed as a Teams user. So let's give him the benefit of an extension now. Somehow Ann had one, but we'll give one to Frank now too. So we'll give him this extension, ends with 1008. We'll enable him for enterprise voice, and we'll even give him a voicemail box, and then we'll perform. So as we did before, this case, I'm hoping it's going to come back. In fact, it probably will come back as a success, and here it is. And on this success, just like when we did Jack before, it comes back as pending. So it's sort of the same thing. We're adding enterprise voice, which is normally a PowerShell command, and once again it takes Microsoft a little bit of time. In this case, because the user already existed, it actually takes them a lot less time than it did for a brand new user, like we did with Jack Casey. So same thing goes. We'll put this to the side for a little bit, and we'll come back later and take a look. In the meantime, let's take a little closer look at some of these templates that I used to create these or to create and also to update the user. So the first thing we'll do is look at the template I used to create Jack Casey. And I use this Add MS365 Team Users. And notice I just clicked on it, and it takes a little bit of time to come up. Sort of like when I chose the name Ann or even Frank from those lists before, it took a little bit of time, and it's for the same reasons, because it's talking to Microsoft. So here it is. Here I got back my information. And notice in fact, those of you who are familiar with the Cisco version of Provisioning Manager, we use global variables. And global variables are delimited or denoted by the double brace, the beginning double brace and end double brace. So here we have a global variable for first name, for last name, and here's like the display name is first name and last name. We have a user ID, and in fact, we even can mix a global variable with hard text, where we created this UPN, where it's a user ID followed by, @ and the fully qualified domain name. I scroll down a little bit, and here's my super hard default password. And we also create the Office 65 groups, but also notice here is the Teams configuration. And once again, this is the PowerShell portion. So when we onboard a new user, and in this case, that user I showed you before, Jack Casey, we enabled him for enterprise voice. We gave him a voicemail box. We didn't do anything with the voice routing policy or voice dial plan because the defaults are just fine. Like the dial plan is like the North American numbering plan, and the voice routing policy is one that you can create a whole bunch. We just use the default. and of course the licenses, and then the usage location of United States of America. And at the bottom, last but not least, here we go, the DN pool. So we have already started talking about, we've already started configuring DN pools even on the template. And there's also one in the line template, sorry, in the site template. So remember we chose Miami. Miami, of course, have its own DN pool, and we're going to see the Miami DN pool in a bit. And we also include that in the site template. So that is the brand new user template. Let's move on to the template that we used to create, well, we used to update Frank, and also when we tried to update Anne. And this is the Edit MEMS 365 Teams user. Once again, I just clicked it, and it takes a few seconds to come up. Once again, because it's querying Microsoft Online, it's getting some information back from it, like certain types of choices within the list. So those of you who've seen edit templates, specifically the end user edit template from the Cisco side of Provisioning Manager, you'll probably find this very familiar. So these checkboxes show the fields that we're going to present on provisions. Remember, we were asked about a desk phone. It was an entry field where we put in an extension. I scroll down a little bit more to the next group of checks. Here is the Teams configuration. This is, once again, the PowerShell point. Remember, I had Enterprise Voice enabled. It was a checkbox. Here's the online on-prem line URI. This was an entry field where we put the extension in. Hosted voicemail, that was a checkbox. And then these last two here, voice routing policy and voice dial plan, remember those were drop-down lists, which we just left default, which was the global. And then last but not least, the licenses. Remember, those licenses came up when we did the query. You saw the licenses and the location, which was United States of America. So those are the templates that we've used. So this is just sort of the engine under the bonnet here. And as I've always said that a good magician, or actually I haven't always said that. Other people have said good magicians never reveal their secrets. Well, as you can see, I'm not a very good magician. I'm actually an engineer, and I like to show my secrets. So, but that is the secret behind this magic that I've just shown you. So let's go back to the dashboard. We'll take a very quick look because I have a feeling we have some changes here. So if I look at this was the Frank coil, and notice his enable Teams voice is now enabled. It's now green. There's no pending, and this middle one was Ann that we had a little problem with. But here is the Jack Casey one. Remember, we onboarded him first, and it was also pending. Also, his voice is enabled. So if we go back into Microsoft, first of all, let's refresh Frank Coyle. And Frank Coyle, you'll see, now has a DN and everything. And even Jack Casey is in the system as well. So let's go back to Provisioning Manager. We'll do one more example. And in this case, we're going to actually do an offboard. In fact, let's just offboard Frank this time. So I'm going to use my offboard MS365 user. And I'm going to search for Frank Coyle. And here he is. Once again, it takes a few seconds to load up because it's talking to Microsoft. Here it is. Here's the information we're going to take out. We'll perform. And in this case, unlike what we saw the last two or possibly three cases, the success came very quickly, just like the last time. But in this case, we don't have to worry about pending. It's just this is a delete user, so I just took it out. So if I go back into my Microsoft admin, I'll close this Jack Casey, and I'll click on this refresh here. In fact, I might have to click on it a couple times because it doesn't do it immediately. Frank Coyle will eventually go away, but because Microsoft is a little slower than often is, here it goes. Frank Coyle is gone now. So here he is, or he's actually gone. Frank Brooks is the only one left, but that's not the guy we deleted. And that's the offboard. So let's dive a little bit deeper into DN management. I told you we've been talking about it throughout this presentation. We talked about it in the Cisco context, which are these two in the New York and Los Angeles. We also have, for those of you also who are familiar with our DN management, you'll see now we have this additional tab for MS Online, and here's our Miami directory number pool, and we have a profile name. And notice this third row here where it says DN aging. DN aging is a very interesting concept. And once again, those of you who are familiar with our DN management from Cisco will know that DN aging is a system where, let's say you have a corporate policy that says if you offboard a user and a user's extension, that user's extension, perhaps you don't want to have it available to be reprovisioned to a new user for, let's say, 30 days or 60 days. So the concept of DN aging is basically just that policy. Let's say the age you want it to be for 60 days. You would set up DN aging for 60 days. And when you offboard a user, that extension is not available on the next opportunity. You'll see, remember that DN list had like those gaps? That extension will be another such gap in that list for 60 days. And then on the 61st day, it'll show itself back in that list. So DN aging is really the process of putting extensions, let's say, in a penalty box for a certain amount of time, and after which you can use for provisioning. Now I'm going to scroll down a little bit further over here to my actual DN pool. Now notice I have a whole bunch of contiguous numbers. Some say they're used, some say they're not. But this explains some of the reason why you didn't see certain extensions in the list. So you see 1002, the ones that are in red are actively in use, and those are the ones that we're missing from the list. The system actually, if I would synchronize it, it synchronizes once a day, or in fact, actually, you might even be able to do it even more often than that, and it just keeps track of the extensions in that list and who is using it, what users have it, and then of course, when it comes to provisioning, it doesn't allow those extensions to show up in the list. So that's DN management in a nutshell. So I'm going to go back to the beginning here. And in fact, that is actually the demo in a nutshell. So some things just to talk about as well that I think you might find interesting. So Andrew mentioned earlier on in his presentation a concept of us being a hybrid solution. And one very good example based on what I just showed you here in terms of the hybrid solution is, in fact, you can actually create jobs that include both Microsoft and Cisco templates. So I showed you jobs separately, a Microsoft and a Cisco job separately. But there are situations where perhaps you want to add Cisco templates to a Microsoft job. For example, you have a system that is currently in flux. It's sort of in transit. You know, you were a Cisco shop for a very long time, and now you're trying to implement Microsoft. You're trying to migrate to Microsoft, but you're not doing it all at once. You're doing it certain sites or certain users at a time, and your PSTN SIP trunk is still being managed by call managers. So that means all inbound calls coming into your system, be it for Microsoft or Cisco, all have to run through Cisco first, through Cisco Call Manager first. So how do you get that call, let's say to Jack Casey, to his extension? It's going to come into Call Manager. What do? Well, you need to create route patterns. Route patterns will redirect inbound calls to an outbound PSTN trunk or to a trunk to another phone system. So let's say your onboarding job now, not only do you want to create them in Microsoft, but you might also want to create a route pattern in Cisco Call Manager with that line URI, so that it redirects into the Microsoft environment. So that is one very, very obvious example of how you would use, let's say, Provisioning Manager in a hybrid solution. I can think of a whole lot of other reasons and a whole lot of things to do, but we don't have a lot of time for all that. So if you are interested in maybe getting a more customized demo or want to talk further about what this particular product, Provisioning Manager, can do for you in your environment, please reach out to us. We'd be more than happy to do another demo for you or answer any of your questions. And with that, I'm going to hand the mic back to Andrew and have him give you a few final words. Go ahead, Andrew.
Thanks, Mike. So in summary, hybrid is our sweet spot, and we're here to help. There's a host of exciting features currently on the development roadmap for Acadian Provisioning Manager around Microsoft Teams. And these have very much been driven by conversations with our customers. We want to hear from you as the Microsoft roadmap is continuously evolving, and this is just the beginning. We look forward to continuing the conversation.